For every game you love, there's bound to be somebody who thinks it's the worst thing ever. But several games have seriously divided gamers between those who think it's awesome and those who think it's crap. Since Valentine's Day is just past, let's talk about games we've got a love-hate relationship with. Let's talk BIOWARE. They're a developer who every so often makes a creative choice that gets a lot of flack from their fans. Let's start with Dragon Age 2. Now, Dragon Age Origins, that is Dragon Age 1, is pretty widely accepted to be a slam dunk. With such an awesome first entry, it was always going to be a real tough act to follow for Dragon Age 2. I'm actually among the people who liked Dragon Age 2, but even I disliked that while Dragon Age 1 had you become the freaking hero of Ferelden and slay a damn archdemon, Dragon Age 2's crowning moment of rescuing the far smaller region of Kirkwall felt like a huge step down story-wise. Dragon Age 2 also suffered from a massive oversimplification of the combat mechanics, since it seems BioWare mistakenly thought gamers found the first game's mechanics too tricky, but thankfully some of that was rectified for last year's Dragon Age Inquisition. BioWare isn't out of the woods yet though, as I'd be totally remiss not to mention their most controversial title among fans, Mass Effect 3. Yet another victim of its own expectations. Now, Mass Effect 2 is regarded as one of the greatest RPGs and perhaps games of all time. So the final entry in Shepard's valiant trilogy had a lot of work to do. In my opinion, Mass Effect 3 had similar issues to Dragon Age 2. The game wasn't altogether bad, in fact it was very good. But it seems like a lot of people still felt the ragey feelings towards BioWare since they had, in effect, asked us to care so much about Mass Effect's story, lore, and spectacular universe, and then, well, stuffed it up. The big issue was with the ending, which spawned, among other things, a charity drive which called for a new ending, which didn't amount to picking one of 3 uncomfortably similar options that you just sat through, and lacked any kind of narrative impact. BioWare did end up releasing a slightly better ending, which provided a bit more closure and satiated some gamers, but it's still a memorable sore spot for the series and an infamous example of what can happen when you piss off your fans. Moving on from BioWare, we have another controversial game that earned itself a 2 out of 10 from one game's publication and a 10 out of 10 from another. It's survival horror game Deadly Premonition. This is a great example of a cult game. A lot of people found the combat and control scheme to be simplistic and clunky, which it is, but others looked past that and found the whole experience of the game to be wonderfully bizarre and entertaining. The plot is certainly quirky and in some places completely ludicrous, with a sense of humor that you'll either get really on board with or will completely leave you behind if you just don't get it. Realistically, there are loads of technical issues with the game, including subpar audio and graphical quality. Nevertheless, the subject of the strangest video game of the year award has been called a beautiful train wreck, and its huge cult following proves that one person's discount bin title can totally be another's game of the year. Now, if I say Skyward Sword sucks or Skyward Sword rocks and you actually know what Skyward Sword is, I'm betting you'll have some kind of reaction. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, like so many of these kinds of games, gets a lot of its criticism from the fact that gamers have huge expectations and set ideas of the Zelda franchise. In Skyward Sword, Link and Zelda are childhood friends, which upset those into the established lore. The game's progression is more linear than past games, and it employs the use of the Wii Remote's motion control for one-to-one directional sword slashing. These controls worked very well for some people and terribly for others. Some people were excited to finally be able to actually swing Link's sword around themselves, while others just weren't keen on waggling their Wiimotes over the course of a 40-hour quest. A bunch of critics and gamers complained about the repetitive locations and quests of Skyward Sword, the naggy, Navi-esque sidekick Fi, and the story which just didn't feel as epic as the previous entries. Interestingly, even though a lot of hardcore Zelda fans are critical of Skyward Sword, Sword, it's been reviewed more positively across the board than pretty much any other game I've talked about on this episode. Seriously, look at those scores. Skyward Sword is a pretty perfect example of how certain games can divide audiences so strongly. Let me know down in the comments if you reckon these games I've mentioned are awesome or crap, and if there's any games that you love that everybody hates, or vice versa. Have a great week, and I'll catch you next time.